The rain came down in heavy sheets, drumming against the polished cobblestones of the long driveway that stretched like a silver serpent toward the towering mansion ahead. The air smelled of wet earth and money, of rainwater mingling with the distant perfume of imported roses planted in endless rows along the drive. She stood there, soaked despite the umbrella she clutched tightly, her trembling hand betraying the storm inside her more than the one raging across Lagos skies. Her name was Amara, a woman from Enugu who had spent her entire life believing luxury belonged only to magazines and television screens. Yet here she was, standing before a mansion that seemed carved out of paradise itself. The gates were tall, lined with gold-tipped spikes, the kind of gates that reminded you some dreams weren't meant to be touched by ordinary people. And still, she pressed forward. Inside the sprawling estate, lights shimmered against glass walls that rose higher than her eyes could take in. Infinity pools stretched toward the edge of the property, their waters glowing under hidden blue lights, defying the storm as though wealth itself could command the weather. Priceless art stood proudly in the lobby, visible through transparent walls, paintings she had only ever seen in catalogs her former boss kept hidden away. Everything about the place whispered excess, whispered danger, whispered power. Her chest tightened. She felt like an intruder in a world that wasn't hers. The guards at the gate barely gave her more than a nod after confirming her identity. She walked slowly, her heels clicking against the marble entryway, and when the doors opened before her, she stopped breathing for just a moment. Because that was when she saw him. Obinna Nwokocha, billionaire, untouchable. The man whispered about in Lagos elite circles, whose name made waves in private auctions, whose signature could alter economies. He stood at the top of the staircase, tall and immovable, his tailored suit sculpted onto a body that spoke of discipline and authority. His gaze cut down the room, sharp as steel, landing directly on her. Their eyes met. Amara's breath caught. She tried to stand taller, tried to mask the trembling in her knees, but there was no disguising the way her soul quaked under that stare. His eyes were not warm. They were calculating, assessing, weighing her presence, as though she were an uninvited guest in a world too pure for her kind. And yet, there was something else. A flicker, a spark. The air between them tightened in that brief, electric second, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. "Welcome," his voice finally echoed, curt and deep, traveling across the polished marble like a command instead of a greeting. She bowed her head slightly, murmuring something polite, though her words drowned under the beating of her heart. For the first time in her life, Amara understood what it meant to feel small, yet desired all at once. As she followed the assistant who ushered her in, her senses were assaulted by the glamour that made up Obinna's empire. Rooms lined with chandeliers, dripping crystal like frozen waterfalls, staircases that curved endlessly into new wings, walls of wine taller than she was, and hallways filled with scents of foreign perfumes and polished mahogany. The Lagos elite orbited this world like planets around the Sunday. She had read about them: women in couture gowns flown in from Milan, men who wagered millions over champagne nights, business moguls who bought art not for beauty but as trophies of power. This was the world Obinna owned, and tonight, for reasons she couldn't fully understand, she was being led into it. The excuse was simple: a business internship. That was what the email had said, the opportunity of a lifetime. Yet, as Amara looked around, she wondered if this was an internship or an invitation into something she wasn't prepared for. Her awe battled her fear. Every step forward made her heart split wider, one half whispering that she should run before this world consumed her, the other urging her to stay, to grasp whatever chance fate had so recklessly placed in her path. When Obinna finally stepped closer, their first true exchange lasted barely a breath. "You must be Amara," he said. "Yes, sir," she whispered, her voice softer than she intended, almost trembling. His lips curved slightly, though not into a smile. It was something more dangerous, more unreadable. "We'll see if you belong here." The words lingered between them like smoke. She swallowed, nodding slowly. But her silence spoke volumes her tongue could never carry. And then, just as she thought the night couldn't feel heavier, a sharp vibration in her purse broke the fragile tension. Her phone buzzed insistently, lighting up with an unknown number. Hesitantly, she excused herself and stepped aside, pressing the phone to her ear. A deep voice, low and cold, spilled through the line. "You're not safe there, Amara. Someone is watching every step you take inside that mansion." The call cut abruptly. Her breath froze. The chandelier lights above seemed to flicker, or maybe it was her fear twisting her sight. Slowly, she lifted her gaze back toward Obinna, who was still watching her closely, his eyes unreadable. She knew in that moment. Stepping into this world wasn't just about wealth. It was about survival. And someone out there already didn't want her to survive it. The storm outside had quieted, but Amara's heart had not. Days had passed since she stepped into Obinna's mansion, yet the echo of that mysterious phone call haunted her like a shadow that refused to release its grip. She buried herself in her new role as an intern, though every corridor of glass and steel seemed to carry invisible eyes tracking her movements. The billionaire's empire was dazzling, yet its brilliance only sharpened her sense of being out of place, a visitor in a temple where she did not belong. It was during one of those uneasy afternoons that she encountered him, Chief Adetola Ajayi. His name carried weight in Lagos, though not the kind Obinna's did. Where Obinna was sleek, modern, and ruthless in silence, Adetola was flamboyant, a man who lived loudly. His reputation was that of a rival billionaire, one who had lost ground in the cutthroat wars of contracts and influence. Many whispered that his empire was crumbling, suffocated under Obinna's dominance. Adetola approached her with the politeness of an uncle, not the aggression of a businessman. They met first at a charity gala, the kind where diamonds glittered like stars and the champagne seemed endless. She had been sent by Obinna's assistant to observe and report, but Adetola's eyes found her before she could fade into the background. His voice was warm, deceptively inviting, when he leaned close and murmured, "You don't belong in his world, do you?" Her chest tightened. She tried to walk away, but he followed gently, like a shadow unwilling to let go. "I know the look of someone fighting battles bigger than her shoulders," he continued, "and I know how it feels to come from where you come from." The words pierced. Because he was right. At first, she resisted, wary of his tone. But Adetola did not speak of war. He spoke of fairness, of balance. He framed himself as the underdog, a man whose legacy was being destroyed by Obinna's arrogance. "All I ask," he said, his gaze steady, "is that you help level the field. Not for me, but for those who cannot fight back. Temptation rarely arrives, dressed as betrayal. It comes dressed as justice." He reminded her of her own reality, slicing through her defenses. Her younger brother, Chidera, had been sent home from school again. The fees remained unpaid, and every day he lingered in their one-room apartment in Enugu, his textbooks gathering dust. Their mother's market stall, once lively, with peppers and tomatoes, now sat withered under the burden of debts and low sales. Amara carried those struggles like stones tied to her heart. Adetola painted the picture clearly. "With your help, your family's poverty will vanish. Your mother will stand proud in the market again. Your brother will return to school, perhaps even to university abroad. And you," he paused, letting the silence stretch before finishing softly, "you will finally breathe." Her throat ached. She wanted to scream that it was wrong, that she wasn't that kind of woman. But desperation spoke louder than morality. The deal seemed harmless, at least in the way he framed it. "You won't betray him," Adetola assured her. "Just share little things. Nothing dangerous, nothing that will hurt anyone. Small details, here and there. Call it helping a man who has already lost too much." Amara hesitated, but in the weeks that followed, temptation kept gnawing. The burden of her family's suffering clawed at her resolve. Finally, when Adetola reached out again, she agreed to a test. One trivial piece of information, something so minor she could convince herself it meant nothing. And so it began. She delivered the data through a carefully arranged meeting, her heart pounding against her ribs like a prisoner trying to escape. The venue was a high-rise lounge in Victoria Island, all velvet seats and soft jazz music that masked whispers like theirs. The air smelled of cigar smoke and imported whiskey. Her palms were damp as she slid the paper across the table, the tiniest piece of Obinna's empire leaking into rival hands. It was supposed to be harmless, but guilt was a living thing. Even before Adetola nodded in approval, even before he folded the slip into his jacket, Amara's soul had already begun to crack under the weight of what she had done. She could still hear Obinna's deep voice from that night at the mansion. "We'll see if you belong here." Did she? She just proven she didn't? Her reward came quickly, almost too quickly. Adetola reached under the table, sliding across a leather envelope. When she opened it discreetly, her breath caught. Inside lay bundles of crisp Naira notes, stacked so thickly they seemed heavier than gold. Her hands trembled as she touched them, as though fire had been placed in her palms. This was more money than her family had seen in years, enough to pay her brother's fees, enough to revive her mother's stall. enough to buy time, if not dignity. But as she clutched the bundle close, one truth echoed louder than all the rest. Money was never just paper. It carried secrets, chains, and the scent of choices that could not be undone. Amara left the lounge that night with her purse heavier and her conscience hollow. She had taken the first step into the shadow deal, and there would be no turning back. For weeks, Amara told herself she was invisible in Obinna's world, a ghost passing through his empire of glass and steel. Yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted. The sharp, calculating gaze that once cut through her like ice began to soften. He no longer looked at her as though she were an intruder. He looked at her as though he were trying to solve a puzzle he could not put down. It began with questions that seemed too simple for a man like him. "How are you finding the internship?" he asked one afternoon in his office, his voice gentler than she had ever heard it. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed him like a king surveying his kingdom, yet the way he leaned forward, elbows on his desk, eyes fixed on her, was disarmingly human. She stammered out polite answers, yet the silence that followed felt charged. For the first time, she sensed not just authority in him but loneliness. That loneliness revealed itself piece by piece, as if Obinna had been waiting for someone, anyone, to peel back the layers he had built since his father's death. Late one evening, when the mansion was quieter than usual, he spoke of the man who had built it all, his late father, Chief Nwokocha. "He wanted me to carry everything," Obinna said, his voice distant, almost breaking. "But he never told me what to do when the weight becomes too much." Amara sat in silence, listening, her heart torn. She had imagined his life as unshakable, perfect, glittering with ease. Yet here he was, admitting to emptiness even money could not drown. From then on, his walls crumbled in ways she hadn't expected. He invited her to dinners that were nothing like the grand feasts of the elite. These were quieter affairs, just the two of them on a rooftop terrace overlooking the skyline of Eko Atlantic. Below, Lagos glittered like 1,000 jewels scattered on velvet, the Atlantic waves crashing softly against the shore. He spoke freely in these moments, sharing not just strategies of business but fragments of himself. His laughter when she teased him about his rigid routines, and his patience as he explained the architectural marvels he had invested in. His fears that everything he built could collapse with a single wrong decision. She began to see the man, not the billionaire, and in seeing him, she felt herself being drawn into a current she could no longer resist. Stolen glances became the rhythm of their days, his eyes lingering too long when she entered a room, her gaze darting away too quickly whenever he passed too close. Whispered conversations filled the corridors of the mansion, words not meant for others' ears. Every brush of his hand against hers carried a spark. Every shared silence carried the weight of a confession neither dared to speak aloud. Their romance grew like fire hidden under ash, secret, restrained, yet dangerously alive. And with every moment of tenderness, her guilt deepened. Because while he was opening his soul to her, she was handing pieces of it away in secret meetings with Adetola. By day, she passed information small, harmless, details that felt less harmless with each exchange. By night, she found herself slipping into Obinna's orbit, drawn into his warmth, his fragility, his undeniable pull. The duality gnawed at her. Her conscience screamed that she was betraying a man who had given her more than she had ever dreamed. Yet her heart whispered that it was too late to stop. Each kiss they shared, stolen under chandeliers or in quiet gardens, felt like both a blessing and a curse. She could not resist him, but she could not silence the guilt that came with every touch. Obinna, oblivious to the war within her, gave more of himself. He walked her through his private art gallery, showing her pieces his father had collected, telling her which reminded him of home. He took her on drives through the sleepless streets of Lagos, windows down, their laughter carried away by the night air. He began to trust her, not as an intern, not even as a woman who happened to stumble into his world, but as someone who made him believe he was still human beneath the armor of wealth. The contrast of his world, the wealth, the extravagance, and the sincerity of his heart left Amara undone. She wondered if perhaps love could exist even in the shadow of betrayal, if perhaps she could rewrite the choices she had already made. But time was cruel, and guilt was relentless. One night, under the silvery wash of moonlight spilling across the mansion's terrace, Obinna turned to her. His usual confidence was absent. In its place was a hesitation that made him seem almost boyish. He looked at her as though searching for an answer in her eyes, and then, with a quiet vulnerability she had never imagined he possessed, he said the words that froze her world in place. "I think I am falling for you." The night went still, the city lights blurred in her vision. Her heart raced with a mixture of joy and terror, because love was no longer just a possibility, it was a confession, and it was one she could not afford to accept without tearing her soul apart. By day, she floated through Obinna's empire like a woman reborn. By night, she carried the poison of her choices tucked beneath her heart. Her life had become a delicate performance, a stage where every smile, every glance, every word was carefully rehearsed. And yet, no matter how radiant she appeared, she knew the mask was cracking beneath the weight of secrets she could not confess. The betrayal continued, silent and insidious. Every time she left Adatola's presence, her conscience roared, demanding she return the money, walk away, beg for forgiveness. But each time, desperation bound her tighter than chains. Her brother's school fees had been paid. Her mother's stall was alive again, stocked with fresh peppers and tomatoes. For the first time in years, her family breathed without the chokehold of poverty. Could she really undo all that by turning her back now? Her outward transformation mirrored the tug of war within her soul. The young woman who once wore simple cotton dresses from roadside stalls now moved through Obinna's mansion, draped in gowns sewn by Lagos's finest designers. Jewelry sparkled at her wrists, her heels clicked with the elegance of someone who belonged among the elite. Yet every time she caught her reflection in the glass walls of the mansion, she saw not a woman elevated but a woman haunted. The contrast cut deeper each day. With every kind gesture from Obinna, her guilt sharpened into a blade. When he pulled out her chair at dinner, when he lowered his voice to ask if she was comfortable, when he laughed at her nervous jokes, each moment whispered the same truth. She did not deserve him. She carried shadows in a house that only ever offered her light. But shadows have a way of growing, and Adetola was no longer content with scraps. His messages came sharper now, urgent and demanding. The harmless details were no longer enough. He began to request files that brushed too close to Obinna's core operations numbers, partnerships, strategies. Each request made Amara's chest tighten, her pulse spike. She told herself she would stop, that she would draw a line. Yet every time she tried, Adetola's voice on the other end reminded her of the life her family was living, now the comfort, the dignity restored. He reminded her that walking away meant condemning them back to suffering. The pressure began to break her. There were days she would lock herself in the bathroom of Obinna's mansion, hands braced against the marble sink, tears slipping down her cheeks before carefully blotting her face, painting on a smile, and stepping back out into the grandeur of his world. No one could see the cracks. No one could know that beneath the flawless gowns and carefully done makeup was a girl unraveling thread by thread. Obinna noticed her turbulence, though not its cause. One evening, as they sat overlooking the infinity pool glowing like liquid sapphire under the night sky, he leaned closer. "You've been distant," he said softly, concern lining his usually composed voice. "Is something troubling you?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to confess everything, to fall into his arms and beg him to save her from the mess she had created. But the words tangled into silence. Instead, she shook her head, whispering, "Just personal things, nothing to worry about." He nodded slowly, accepting her half-truth. He assumed it was pain carried from her past, perhaps burdens from her family. He did not see the betrayal behind her eyes. His kindness only deepened her torment. For every lie she told, his trust in her grew stronger, and that trust was a weight she could no longer bear. The stakes of her double life grew sharper by the day. The small lies had become a dangerous web, and she could feel it tightening around her. She lived with the constant dread that a single misstep would reveal her, that the empire she was secretly undermining would turn on her with the wrath she could not survive. Then, one night, as rain tapped against the glass windows of the upscale lounge where they usually met, Adetola leaned forward, his expression no longer warm but edged with steel. His voice dropped low, deliberate, every word cutting like a knife. "It's time," he said. "I need something bigger. One file, one access point. Give me that, and Obinna's empire will never stand again." The air froze. Amara's fingers tightened around her glass, her breath caught in her throat. This was no longer harmless. This was betrayal at its most brutal. This was the moment where one choice could destroy the man who had begun to give her love, trust, and a place in his world. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to scream, to run, to tear herself away from the trap she had walked into. But she sat frozen, staring at Adetola's unwavering eyes, realizing with bone-deep fear that the mask she had been wearing was about to shatter. And if she said yes, it would not just be Obinna's empire that fell. It would be her soul. Obinna Nwokocha had not built his empire by chance. His instincts were sharp, Forged in the fire of deals won and wars survived. Yet now, a disquiet stirred inside him, a whisper he could not silence. Something was shifting, subtle but undeniable. His competitors, once scattered and predictable, had begun moving with uncanny precision. Deals he had guarded carefully seemed to slip through invisible cracks. Partnerships he had thought untouchable began to waver, as though someone knew exactly where to strike. It unsettled him. He did not speak of it at first, not even to Amara, whose presence had grown into a constant light in his otherwise relentless world. But behind every glance, behind every touch of her hand, a question pulsed at the back of his mind. Who was feeding the shadows? So he sharpened his instincts. At work, he observed with ruthless calm. Meetings became silent, studies of faces, hands, eyes. Every gesture, every hesitation, every word weighed against the ledger of loyalty. He said less and listened more, allowing silence to reveal truths his employees did not intend to give. He began reviewing files himself, retracing steps, probing for patterns, and slowly, inevitably, his gaze turned toward her. Not with outright accusation, but with a watchfulness that wrapped her like a net. He noticed when she flinched at sudden questions, when her smile came a fraction too late, when her explanations carried tiny fractures that others would dismiss but he would not. His heart warred with his mind, one begging to trust her, the other warning that trust could be his undoing. The tension thickened, unseen yet heavy. It was during one of their drives through Victoria Island that his closest friend and confidant, Chuka, finally voiced the suspicion Obinna dared not say aloud. "You know the saying," Chuka muttered, his tone grave. "Even those closest to you can be your downfall. Empires don't fall from the outside, Obinna. They collapse from within." The words lingered like poison in his thoughts. That night, as he lay awake in the cavernous quiet of his bedroom, he replayed the past weeks. Amara's laughter, her tenderness, her silences. Was she truly who he believed her to be, or had she been sent as a blade dressed in silk? So he began setting silent tests. Subtle questions woven into casual conversations, numbers dropped with deliberate errors, stories told with slight alterations. He wanted to see if she would notice, if she would repeat what she should not know, if she would stumble. Each test was a quiet trap, invisible to anyone but him. And Amara noticed. She felt it in the way his eyes lingered longer than before, in the way his tone at work grew colder, clipped, precise. Yet at home, in the private corners of the mansion, he was softer, almost too soft, as though trying to mask the storm brewing inside him. It left her torn, between suspicion and longing. Was his affection real, or was it another mask, a test she did not understand? The invisible cage closed around her, every bar made of his watchfulness. She could not breathe without fearing he might sense the guilt threading her breath. Every word became a tightrope walk, every glance a battle not to reveal the weight she carried. Yet, in the strange, suffocating tension, their passion remained. Perhaps it was even fiercer, sharpened by the unspoken war between trust and suspicion. Their kisses burned hotter, their embraces lasted longer, as though both were reaching for something pure while surrounded by the rot of betrayal. Still, the bond they shared grew shaky. She found herself trembling when his hand brushed hers, not out of shyness, but fear. She recoiled from questions that once felt harmless, and in her silence, Obinna's doubts deepened. One evening, as they sat beneath the glow of chandeliers after dinner, he asked a simple question about her family, something he had asked before, a detail she had once given casually. And she answered, but differently this time. A small change, barely noticeable. Barely. But Obinna noticed. The flicker in her eyes. The shift in her tone. The inconsistency was tiny, fragile as glass. Yet in that instant, Obinna's heart clenched. It was enough. Enough to whisper that perhaps Chuka had been right. Enough to confirm that the cracks he had sensed were not illusions. He smiled faintly, hiding the storm inside him. But as he raised his glass to his lips, one truth settled heavy in his chest. Someone was betraying him. And the woman he was falling in love with had just given him his first reason to believe it might be her. Obinna Nwokocha had lived his life trusting numbers over words, instincts over appearances. And now, those instincts drove him into the shadows of his own empire, retracing the footprints of the woman he had allowed into his heart. He told himself it was precaution, told himself it was business. But the truth was harsher. He needed to know if Amara was the answer to his prayers or the knife pressed against his back. Quietly, he began digging. He traced her recent activities through security logs, financial trails, and movements that seemed too coincidental to ignore. Each detail piled upon the next, a mosaic of betrayal forming piece by piece. The times she claimed to visit her mother in the market coincided with secret meetings logged at upscale lounges. The sudden appearance of money in her family's accounts, tuition fees paid, debts cleared matched the timeline of his rival's sudden strikes against him. It was undeniable. She was living a double life. The discovery hit him like a thunderclap. In his private study, surrounded by shelves of books and portraits of his late father, Obinna sat for hours staring at the evidence. His mind replayed every tender moment, the way her laughter had eased his silence, the way her touch had soothed the ache of loneliness he never admitted. And now, all of it was poisoned. Every kiss, every whispered word in the corridors, every gaze under moonlight. Was it real? Or had she been acting all along? He could not decide which truth hurt more, that she had used him, or that he had allowed himself to be used. But Obinna was not a man who exploded at the first sting of betrayal. Rage boiled beneath his composure, but he chose silence. He would not confront her yet. Instead, he would watch, measure, and wait for the moment she revealed the full depth of her treachery. And so the game began. At dinners, he smiled at her, his face unreadable as she spoke of her day. In late-night conversations, he asked questions that sounded casual but carried sharp edges. She responded with ease, unaware that every word she spoke was being weighed against the truth he already held in his hands. The tension grew heavy, a quiet storm hanging over every shared meal. She would laugh, her eyes sparkling, but he could see the flicker of nerves beneath. She would lean closer, her hand brushing his, and he felt both rage and longing twist inside him until he could scarcely breathe. Meanwhile, his empire bled. Contracts slipped, negotiations collapsed, and competitors struck with uncanny precision. Every drop of loss tied back to leaks. Every leak traced back to her betrayal. It was as though she were draining him one secret at a time, hollowing out the empire his father had built and he had sworn to protect. The weight of it nearly crushed him. Nights found him pacing the balcony, fists clenched, heart torn between fury and desire. How could he still long for her even as she destroyed him? How could he burn for the same woman whose hands carried knives against his back? The love-hate duality consumed him. In her presence, he saw the woman who made him laugh, who brought color into his lonely world. In her absence, he saw the spy, the betrayer, the storm that threatened to reduce everything he had built to ashes. And yet, the more he hated her betrayal, the more he ached for the softness of her touch. It was a madness he could not escape, a fire that burned him whether he embraced it or tried to resist. But Obinna was not a man to let madness dictate his end. He knew what had to be done. One evening, as the mansion glowed under golden lights and Lagos hummed in the distance, he turned to her with a smile that masked the storm raging inside. "Pack a bag," he said, his voice calm, almost tender. She blinked in surprise. "A bag?" "Yes," he replied. "We're going away. Just the two of us, a private getaway." Her lips parted in wonder, her eyes softening with a joy so pure it twisted his insides. She leaned forward, pressing a grateful kiss against his lips, unaware that beneath his gentle tone lay the steel of decision. Because this trip was not meant for romance. It was meant for truth. And in the solitude of that getaway, Obinna Nwokocha was determined to confront the woman who had turned his heart into a battlefield. The journey to the island felt like a dream Amara never wished to wake from. Obinna's private jet sliced through the skies with effortless grace, the world below shrinking into insignificance. When they landed, a speedboat carried them across turquoise waters to his villa on a secluded island off the coast. It was paradise, white sand beaches, palm trees swaying under the evening breeze, and a villa sculpted from glass and marble as though heaven itself had built it. She thought it was a gift. She thought it was love. That evening, the villa glowed under lanterns and candles. A long table had been set on the open terrace, where the ocean stretched endlessly into the horizon. A gentle wind carried the scent of sea salt and jasmine, while the flicker of candles painted Obinna's face in golden light. Amara's heart fluttered. This was the kind of night she had only ever dreamed about. She wore a silk gown he had chosen for her, its fabric glistening under the moonlight. She smiled, raising her glass when he poured wine, her laughter trembling with joy. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe the world was simple again, that her betrayal could be forgotten, that love could erase her sins. But Obinna's silence was heavy. He watched her across the table, his eyes unreadable, his jaw set in quiet strength. The warmth she expected never came. Instead, the air grew thick, charged with something invisible but deadly. Finally, his voice cut through the night. Low, controlled, sharp as a blade. How long? Her hand froze mid-air, the glass trembling. What do you mean? She whispered. Obinna leaned forward, placing a folder on the table. His fingers tapped against it, deliberate, final. How long have you been selling me? The blood drained from her face. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The folder opened with a flick, revealing papers she could not ignore. Dates, times, screenshots of messages, financial records of payments linked to her family's accounts. Every secret she thought buried now lay bare under the candlelight. Explain, he demanded, though his tone carried no anger, only cold devastation. Tears blurred her vision as her chest tightened. She wanted to deny, to fight, but the truth was undeniable. The evidence was iron. Her mask fell, shattering in the space between them. Her voice cracked, raw and broken. I didn't mean to destroy you, Obinna. I swear I never meant it. My brother, he was sent home from school again. My mother, her stall was dying. We had nothing. Adetola came, and he promised me it would be harmless. Just small things, just enough to help my family breathe. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could stop before it hurt you. But it kept growing, and I was too weak. Her tears fell freely, splashing against the polished table. Every night, I hated myself for it. Every morning, I swore it would be the last time. But then I saw what it gave my family. And I couldn't stop. I was drowning, Obinna. Drowning in poverty, in desperation. And you were the only light. And that's what makes it worse, because while I betrayed you, I was falling in love with you. Her voice cracked into sobs, her shoulders shaking. She pressed her palms together as though in prayer, begging, Please, Obinna, please forgive me. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted this. I only wanted to survive. The ocean roared against the shore, filling the silence he left between them. Obinna sat motionless, his face carved from stone. His eyes bore into her, not with fury, but with a depth she could not read. He listened to every word, his silence more terrifying than anger. When she finally collapsed into silence, drained and broken, he rose slowly from his chair. Her heart pounded. Say something, she whispered desperately. But he said nothing. He only looked at her. The man who had once held her heart now untouchable, unreachable. His silence cut deeper than any words of rage could. When he finally turned and walked away from the table, his footsteps echoing into the villa, Amara's chest caved in. She fell to her knees, sobbing into her hands, the night spinning around her. The candles flickered in the wind, their flames struggling against the darkness, and she was left alone, shattered, with the echo of his silence ringing louder than any storm. The fall came swiftly, without warning, like a door slammed in her face. One day she walked through the glass corridors of Obinna's mansion, draped in silks and diamonds. The next, the gates refused to open for her. Security guards who once bowed their heads now looked at her as though she were a stranger trespassing on sacred ground. Luxury cars that once carried her through Lagos disappeared from her reach. The maids who once whispered compliments behind her back turned their faces away. In a single night, the empire that had embraced her spat her out. She tried calling him, but the line never connected. She sent messages that remained unanswered. It was as though she had been erased from his world, her existence a stain he wanted no trace of. Desperate, she turned to Adetola, the rival who had lured her into betrayal. But his number 2 was unreachable. His aides denied knowing her, and his office turned her away with cold efficiency. The man who had once promised her salvation had vanished like smoke. She was abandoned, stripped of wealth, stripped of power, stripped of love. So she went back to where it all began. Her old neighborhood in Enugu welcomed her, not with open arms, but with the harsh reality she had tried so hard to escape. The one-room apartment smelled of damp air and overused cooking oil. The paint peeled from the walls. The water buckets lined the corridor, waiting for their turn at the public tap. Survival here was not romantic. It was cruel, relentless. At night, she lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, haunted by memories of Obinna's laughter, the glow of candlelit dinners, the feel of his hand against hers. Her dreams were no kinder. They replayed moments she wanted to forget, only to remind her of the paradise she had lost. Every morning she woke with her heart heavier, regret gnawing at her like a starving beast. Her family noticed. Her younger brother, now back in school because of the money she had earned through betrayal, would ask why her smile had vanished. Her mother, busy at the market stall that once again flourished, would watch her quietly, her eyes filled with questions Amara refused to answer. She lied with a brave face, claiming fatigue, claiming headaches, claiming everything but the truth. For how could she confess that the wealth they now enjoyed was built on lies that had cost her the only love she had ever known? Days blurred into weeks. With no more riches to hide behind, Amara returned to the grind of ordinary life. She took jobs in small offices, worked in boutiques, even served at restaurants where the sound of clinking glasses reminded her too much of champagne nights she once lived. Every paycheck was meager, but it was honest. Still, no matter how hard she worked, she could not shake the ghost of who she had been in Obinna's world. The gowns she had worn, the mansions she had walked through, the skyline dinners they haunted her every step, mocking her present poverty. Yet the emptiness of losing wealth was nothing compared to the emptiness of losing him. Obinna's absence hollowed her. She missed not the luxuries but the way his voice softened when he spoke of his father, the way his eyes carried storms and secrets, the way he had held her as though she was more than her past. That was the loss she could not endure. That was the grief she could not bury. And still, Lagos whispered, in the marketplace, in office corridors, in the buzzing chaos of the streets, his name floated like smoke. She could never escape. Rumors ran wild. Obinna was back in the spotlight, stronger than ever. Contracts had been secured, rivals silenced, and with power restored came whispers of his heart. People spoke of a woman, a socialite from one of Lagos's most powerful families, glamorous and untouchable, the kind of woman who belonged by his side. Each whisper was a dagger. One evening, while walking home through the crowded street, she overheard two women chatting loudly by a suya stand. Their voices carried above the sizzle of fire and meat. They say Obinna Nwokocha is getting married, one said, eyes wide with excitement. To who? The other asked. The first leaned closer, lowering her voice, though not enough to escape Amara's ears. To Ifeoma Kalu. You know her, the daughter of that politician. It's supposed to be the wedding of the year. Invitations already being whispered about. The world seemed to tilt beneath Amara's feet. Her chest tightened, her steps faltered, the ground itself threatening to swallow her. Obinna. Engaged. To another woman. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her vision blurring with unshed tears. The whispers grew louder, the crowd thicker, but all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart. If the rumors were true, then the man she loved, the man she had betrayed, was about to belong to someone else forever, and she had no power left to stop it. The whispers grew into headlines, and soon the whole of Lagos buzzed with the news. Obinna Nwokocha was engaged. The photographs splashed across glossy magazines showed him standing beside Ifeoma Kalu, the daughter of a powerful politician. Together they looked like royalty, her in dazzling gowns of sequined silk, him in tailored suits that glistened under camera flashes. They were the image of perfection, a union of power and wealth, the kind of pairing society worshipped. But Amara's heart broke anew with every image. From the outside, she watched. She saw the headlines praising Ifeoma's beauty, her elegance, her lineage. Yet behind the mask of glamour, whispers told another story. Ifeoma Kalu was no saint. Rumors painted her as manipulative, a woman whose hunger for Obinna's empire rivaled any rival's thirst for his downfall. They said she had lovers hidden in the shadows, secret deals stitched into the seams of her gowns, ambitions that stretched far beyond marriage. For Amara, the irony cut deep. She, the woman who had betrayed Obinna out of desperation, now stood watching another woman prepared to betray him for greed. But unlike her, Ifeoma played with calculated confidence, her mask flawless under the camera's gaze. The shame of her past chained Amara in silence. She had no right to warn him, no right to protect him. What weight did her words carry when she had already sold him once before? And yet, the love in her heart refused to die. One night, unable to resist the ache of longing, she made a reckless choice. She borrowed a gown from a friend, slipped into borrowed heels, and sneaked into an elite party where she knew Obinna and Ifeoma would appear. The ballroom was drenched in wealth, crystal chandeliers dripping light, champagne flutes raised like trophies, laughter echoing against marble walls. She stayed hidden at first, pressed against the crowd, her eyes scanning for him. And then she saw him. Obinna, tall, commanding, dressed in midnight black. His hand rested lightly on Ifeoma's back as they greeted politicians and celebrities. His smile practiced, but his eyes distant. The sight tore Amara apart, but then his gaze shifted. Across the crowded room, their eyes met. The air left her lungs. Time slowed, the world blurring into silence. His eyes, those familiar, piercing eyes, locked onto hers. Electric, painful, unresolved. 1,000 unspoken words passed between them in that moment. Love, betrayal, regret, longing. She wanted to run into his arms, to beg for another chance. But his face was unreadable, carved into composure. The spell broke when Ifeoma tugged at his sleeve, pulling him back into the whirl of society. Still, Amara could not tear her eyes away. As she lingered in the shadows, gossip curled around her like smoke. Women with diamond necklaces whispered that Ifeoma had been seen with another man, a business tycoon from Abuja. Men chuckled that Ifeoma's marriage to Obinna was more about his empire than his heart. Amara listened, every word sinking like stone into her chest. Suspense tightened its grip. Should she warn him? Should she walk into his life again and tell him the truth that the woman he was about to marry had her own knives hidden behind her smile? But how could she? Her own betrayal disqualified her. She had no voice left in his world. If she approached him, would he even listen? Or would he see her as nothing more than a desperate woman trying to sabotage his happiness? Yet silence was a torment she could no longer endure. That night, when she returned to her small room in Enugu, she sat on the edge of her bed, trembling, torn between fear and love. She remembered every moment of her past with him, the rooftop dinners, the moonlit confessions, the warmth in his eyes before everything shattered, and she knew she would risk everything. Even if he rejected her, even if he cursed her name, she could not let him walk blindly into another trap. And so, days later, as midnight cloaked Lagos in shadows, Amara stood outside the towering glass office of Nwokocha Holdings. Her hands trembled, her knees weak, but determination burned in her chest. She pressed her palm against the cold steel of the door, her heart pounding louder than the silence of the night. She was about to face him again. Not as the betrayer he had cast away, not as the woman broken by exile, but as the only person who dared to tell him the truth. The office loomed like a fortress of glass and steel, towering over Lagos with its midnight glow. Inside, silence reigned, broken only by the soft hum of the city below. Obinna sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his face illuminated by the pale light of his laptop, his mind buried in contracts and shadows. The click of heels broke the silence. When the doors opened, his eyes lifted and froze. Amara stood there, fragile yet determined, her hands trembling as she clasped them before her. Her voice wavered, but her gaze held steady. 5 minutes, she whispered. Please. Just give me 5 minutes. His jaw tightened. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes hard, his voice colder than ice. You have no right to stand here. I know, she admitted, her chest heaving. But I had to come. I had to warn you. He laughed, though there was no humor in it, only bitterness. Warn me? After everything you did? After selling me piece by piece, you now stand here claiming concern? Her throat burned, but she pushed forward. It's about her, Ifeoma. She's not what she seems. She doesn't love you, Obinna. She's using you, your empire, your name. She's playing her own game. His eyes narrowed, his fists curling. Enough. Don't stand here and insult my fiancé because you're jealous. You've already proven yourself capable of manipulation. You want me to believe you've come back to save me? You're here because you can't stand seeing me move on. The words sliced through her, but she didn't retreat. Her voice cracked as tears welled in her eyes. I have nothing left to gain. Nothing. You've taken everything from me, your love, your trust, your world. I came here with empty hands, Obinna. Empty hands and a heart that still won't stop beating for you. If I wanted to destroy you, I had my chance. I failed you once, but I won't fail you again. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the polished floor, her sobs raw, unpolished. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm begging you to see the truth before it's too late. Obinna's chest heaved as he watched her. Pride warred with memory, anger clashing with the ghost of tenderness. His pride screamed to cast her out, to never let her voice taint his office again. Yet her pain, raw, unguarded, undeniable, stirred something he could not silence. For the first time, doubt slipped into his mind. That night, after she was escorted out of the building, he poured himself a drink and sat alone, replaying her words. His fiancée's smile flashed in his memory, the ease with which she charmed every room, the way she always seemed 2 steps ahead. He remembered moments tiny, fleeting, when her eyes flickered too sharply, when her laughter felt too rehearsed. Subtle cracks in a mask he had never bothered to inspect. Could Amara be right? Suspense settled over him like a shroud. He refused to act openly, not yet. But quietly, methodically, he began to investigate. He asked questions without asking them, traced deals without leaving footprints, and placed eyes in places his fiancée thought hidden. Each thread he pulled revealed another knot, and though he tried to resist, his heart softened. When he thought of Amara's trembling voice, her brokenness, her tears staining his office floor, he could not shake the sincerity of it. She had nothing left to gain, and yet she had risked everything to warn him. Could betrayal and love exist side by side? Could a heart broken once still speak truth? The questions gnawed at him, and with them came a faint rekindling of the bond he thought he had buried. He found himself remembering her laughter, her touch, her eyes when they had once looked at him with untainted adoration. He told himself it was weakness, but deep down, he knew it was more. Days later, the truth struck like lightning. At a private gathering in Ikoyi, he excused himself early from the crowd, slipping through quiet corridors of a 5-star hotel where Ifeoma claimed she was meeting her cousin. The soft murmur of voices behind a half-closed door caught his attention. He moved closer, silent as the predator he had learned to be in business. And there she was, his fiancée, Ifeoma Kalu, wrapped in the arms of another man. The sight froze him. 1,000 emotions crashed within him: rage, betrayal, vindication. His heart pounded as his fists clenched, the truth burning through every nerve in his body. For a long moment, he stood there, silent witness to the mask shattering before his eyes. Amara had been right, and everything was about to change. The night he saw Ifeoma in another man's arms, Obinna walked away without a word. Rage churned inside him, but beneath it lay something deeper: vindication, and a haunting echo of Amara's voice. She had warned him, risking humiliation to speak a truth he had refused to hear. And now, faced with undeniable betrayal, the irony burned. The woman who once sold him out had just saved him. It unsettled him more than Ifeoma's infidelity. For days, he kept to himself, orchestrating a quiet dismantling of Ifeoma's schemes. Her alliances were severed, her access revoked, her engagement dissolved without the courtesy of a conversation. In Obinna's world, silence was the sharpest blade, and with one sweep, he cut her out of his life. Yet even as the socialite's influence collapsed, his heart wrestled with a question he could not ignore. What of Amara? The memory of her kneeling on his office floor returned again and again, the desperation in her eyes, the sincerity in her voice. She had broken him once, but she had also saved him from a greater ruin. Could betrayal and salvation come from the same hands? Could love survive such wounds? When he finally summoned her, the city hummed with midnight quiet. She arrived hesitant, her body trembling as though walking into Judgment Day. The office lights cast a soft glow, and for a long while, silence reigned between them. Neither spoke. Then, slowly, tears welled in her eyes. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You saw the truth, didn't you?" Obinna's chest rose and fell heavily. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her as though seeing her for the first time, not as the betrayer, not as the woman who had once lied, but as the fragile, flawed, desperate soul who had risked her pride to make him see. Finally, words came. "You were right." Her breath hitched, her shoulders shaking. She covered her face with trembling hands, sobbing quietly. When he stepped forward, she flinched as though expecting rejection, but his arms closed around her, tentative, hesitant, yet real. The embrace broke them both. Forgiveness did not come easily. It was not instant, not complete. It burned, like pressing wounds together to stop the bleeding. He wanted to push her away, yet he could not deny the part of him that still longed for her. She wanted to beg endlessly, yet she knew words could not erase the past, and so they held each other in silence, their tears speaking more than apologies ever could. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "I still love you, Amara. Against reason, against logic, against everything, you're still the one my heart refuses to let go." Her knees nearly gave way. She clung to him, sobbing into his chest. "I swear I will never betray you again. Never. I will carry the guilt of what I did until my last breath, but I will never hurt you again. If I have to spend the rest of my life proving it, I will." His hand trembled as it stroked her hair, torn between trust and memory. The reunion was healing, but fragile, as though one wrong word could shatter it again. Suspense coiled in the air. Could trust truly be rebuilt? Could love grow again in soil poisoned by betrayal? They stepped out into the night together, the city lights painting Lagos in gold and silver. Cars passed, neon signs glowed, and in that chaos, they found stillness. She looked up at him, eyes swollen but alive with hope. He leaned down, their lips meeting under the open sky. The kiss was not the innocent sweetness of their beginning, nor the desperate passion of their affair. It was something new, rebirth, painful yet beautiful. When their lips parted, Obinna rested his forehead against hers. His voice was low, steady, a vow and a warning entwined. "If you betray me again," he whispered, "it will destroy me completely." Amara's breath caught, tears spilling once more. She nodded, her voice breaking on a promise. "Then I will never let it happen. Not again. Not ever." The city roared around them, but for a moment, it felt as though the world had gone still, holding its breath for two wounded lovers trying to stitch their hearts back together. Yet beneath the embrace, beneath the kiss, beneath the fragile forgiveness, danger still lingered, because some scars never fully faded, and some shadows were not done with them yet. Theirs was not the kind of love that returned effortlessly, like a flame relit with a spark. No, theirs was love rebuilt in ashes, fragile, scarred, yet determined to rise. Every day was a test. Every gesture carried meaning, and every silence demanded patience. Obinna and Amara walked carefully, aware of the cracks that still lingered beneath the surface. Yet intent guided them. They chose, daily, to fight for what had almost been destroyed. Amara began proving her loyalty not with words, but with action. She stepped into his empire again, not as an intruder, not as a spy, but as a protector. She learned the structure of his businesses, understood the subtle attacks of rivals, and identified patterns of betrayal that even Obinna's sharp instincts sometimes missed. She shielded him from hidden threats, exposing whispers before they became storms. Each time she stood by him, her sincerity spoke louder than her past. Trust did not grow overnight, but slowly, through sacrifice and openness, it took root. Obinna allowed himself to share more of his fears with her, admitting the weight of leadership, the ghosts of failure that haunted him. Amara responded not with admiration alone, but with her own vulnerability, confessing her guilt, her nightmares, her daily struggle to forgive herself. They stitched themselves back together with honesty, each thread a promise never to repeat the mistakes of yesterday. Reintroducing her to his world was not easy. Lagos's elite, ever eager for scandal, whispered behind their champagne glasses. Board members questioned her presence. Friends doubted her intentions, yet Obinna stood firm. His hand never wavered when he placed it at the small of her back in public. His voice never faltered when he introduced her as the woman I choose. His world resisted, but his resolve silenced the noise. And in the quiet, away from flashing cameras, their romance deepened. It was no longer about rooftop terraces and glittering gowns. It was about cooking together in his penthouse kitchen, laughing as they burned plantain. It was about late-night walks through empty streets, where the city's hum softened into background music for whispered dreams. It was about learning to exist not as billionaire and intern, not as betrayer and betrayed, but simply as man and woman. One evening, Amara placed a small envelope on his desk. Her hands trembled as she slid it forward. Inside was every naira she had once accepted from Aditola, the money that had cost her dignity, that had financed her family's relief but shattered her soul. "It cannot erase the past," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "But I cannot keep what destroyed us." Obinna looked at her for a long moment before taking her hand. He did not need the money, it was nothing compared to his wealth, but the gesture was priceless, a symbol of her rebirth, her final severing from the shadow deal, and from that point, their empire thrived. Together, they built stronger defenses, tighter alliances. Amara's insight, shaped by her mistakes, became an asset. She knew how rivals thought, how they sought weakness, how they preyed on desperation. With her beside him, Obinna's empire grew not only in wealth but in resilience. Yet beyond the empire, it was their love that flourished most. Their nights became gentler, their mornings warmer. Every kiss carried history, every embrace carried gratitude. Forgiveness had not erased the scars, but it had transformed them into reminders of what they survived. In the stillness of one evening, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the restless Lagos skyline, Amara leaned into his chest. "Forgiveness," she murmured, "is the rarest form of love." He tightened his arm around her, his eyes tracing the horizon. "And we chose it," he replied softly. Their journey had been war, fire, betrayal, and rebirth. They had lost everything and rebuilt it. Stronger, wiser, bound not by perfection but by resilience. For once, the future seemed theirs to claim without fear. Yet destiny was never finished. As the night deepened, the city lights shimmering like stars, Obinna whispered words that carried both love and warning. But destiny always keeps one last test hidden in the shadows. What would you do if you were in Amara's place? Choose love or loyalty? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed the journey.